Alright, when it comes to the August complex, the Glass Fire, the Creek Fire, and a number of other wildfires in California, we've got some big updates to talk about, and there's also some interesting things in the weather forecast, so I really just want to dive right in. Now, one thing I will mention, if you're short on time or you're only interested in one of the fires, as always, you can click down in the time bar below to go directly to the wildfire you want to hear about. With that being said, I'm going to spend the first few minutes giving a broad overview of the most important factors that affect all our wildfires, so I'd suggest listening to the next few minutes here. Now, starting out with the satellite imagery, you can see that the fires are actually looking extremely active right now. Especially with the August complex up here, you see a large amount of smoke being produced, as well as with the Creek Fire and the Sequoia complex down here. This is appearing to produce some bad air quality throughout the valley, and that's really not what we want to see, and it's interesting to look at some of the variables that are causing some of this fire growth. As always, it's the same three variables we talk about in every single video, the three variables that lead to fire growth: temperature, winds, and humidity. Temperature is an easy one. The warmer it is, the worse wildfire is. When it comes to winds, that can lead to faster fire spread and also spotting, where it picks up a burning ember, throws it elsewhere, and then starts a new little fire. And then humidity. The drier the air is, the drier the vegetation is, and then the faster your fire will spread. So when it comes to the fire spread we're seeing right now, let's first look at temperature, where you can see the forecast for today is still in the mid-90s. Now, granted, this isn't the triple-digit temperatures that we saw last week, but mid-90s is still hot. There is some good news, though, when we look at the forecast. That cooling trend we've been seeing for the last few days is going to continue as you see some of these temperatures, especially around the Glass Fire and the August complex, start to cool off. Now, I'll just forward into Friday and Saturday, where this cooling trend is going to continue and actually significantly go down. Later this week, we could be in the 70s and 60s in most places, which temperature-wise is really going to help all of our fires. So for the next 2 days, relatively warm, a lot cooler than last week, but still in that warm range, which will allow for some fire growth. Now, when it comes to the wind gusts, we're looking much better than last week. Last week, we had some hurricane-force wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Right now and throughout the day today, we are still going to see some gusts in the 20 to 25 mile per hour range around the North Complex and the Creek and Sequoia Complex down here. But again, for the most part, much better than last week. And you can actually see relatively calm winds for the August complex and the Glass Fire. So that's some good news there. As we push into Wednesday, you can see it will actually get a bit windier around the North Complex and Creek Fire again, but that's still in the maybe 25 to 30 mile per hour range, certainly not anywhere near that red flag warning we had last week. So next 2 days, winds a little gustier than we'd like to see, but not nearly as bad as it could be. What is, I would say, my main concern right now, and actually what I would say is leading to the majority of the fire growth that we're seeing, especially with the August complex and the Creek Fire right now, I would blame it on the dry air. You can see the humidity throughout majority of California is in the low teens right now. Now that's important because it's early morning. At this time, it's relatively cool outside, so humidity should be up to maybe 50 or 60%, but as you can see, majority of California is extremely dry. And unfortunately, that's going to continue throughout the day today. We basically stay in the teens all day long, and then even moving into the nighttime hours, that dry air actually expands through California, which will allow some fire spread to continue overnight. Now, the reason that's so important is typically overnight, when temperatures cool off, humidity goes up, that's when firefighters can get a handle on the blaze. But as we've seen, and as you can see with the smoke right now, that dry air is allowing that fire growth to continue overnight. There is some good news though. As we move into Wednesday evening, late Wednesday night, we are going to get a great push of moist, humid air coming in from the ocean, getting pushed in by these winds that you see just flowing straight into the inland parts of California. Now, you can see the effect that's going to have on humidity, as we could get up to 100% humidity Wednesday night into Thursday morning. I can't emphasize enough how important that is going to be for all of our fires. When you get 100% humidity over August Complex, North Complex, Glass Fire, Creek Fire, that is significantly going to help out firefighters. And I'm also glad to say that's not the only good news in the forecast. Towards the end of the week, Friday, Saturday, the exact timing isn't totally confident yet, but we might get a fairly significant rain event. Now, I'm not going to talk about this too much in today's forecast because I have a rule of thumb that I don't trust a forecast more than 3 days out. So while I am going to be keeping my eye on this, I'm not going to go too far into it in this video. Come 2 to 3 days time, then I will give an in-depth rain forecast to see if this event actually ends up happening, and I'm crossing my fingers that it does, because if we get a significant amount of rain, it could, 1, put out some of the fires that we have right now, and 2, if we get enough, it could be the end of fire season, especially if these cooler, rainier conditions continue. Could be wishful thinking, but I know that's certainly what I'm hoping for. Now, with all that smoke that we have right now, because of those warm temperatures and dry air, that's creating some bad air quality, especially over the Creek and Castle Fire here, where, going back to that satellite map, you can see they are producing a large amount of smoke right now, as well as up there with the August Complex. If we go back into the air quality map, you can see those are the areas where we have unhealthy air. Looking at the forecast for today, you can see that unhealthy air is going to stick around. And looking at the forecast for tomorrow, it shows only unhealthy air for the August Complex area, but temperatures are remaining warm, the air is remaining dry, so I imagine the Creek Fire and the Castle Fire will continue to produce a large amount of smoke, leading to poor air quality throughout the valley as well. The main reason for that poor air quality is, 1, the smoke being produced by the dry air that's allowing continued fire growth, and 2, if we go up a few thousand feet and look at the winds, they're extremely calm over California right now. Now that's important because those winds that are higher up typically will push the smoke out of the area. We've seen that happen in the last couple of weeks when we have these strong upper level winds, pushes the smoke out, we get good air quality. Well, as you can see right now, they're extremely calm. Now I know it's kind of hard to tell what strong and calm is on this map right here, so let's just go into Saturday. That purple color represents what strong upper level winds would be. So if we look at what it looks like right now, it's extremely weak, and unfortunately, that's going to be continuing throughout the next couple of days. So when it comes to air quality, that's not exactly what you want to see, but it's a double-edged sword. With more smoke, it actually creates a protective layer over our fires, not allowing sunlight in, keeping the temperatures nice and cool. And also when it comes to some of these weaker winds, that means there's going to be less wind to spread the fire. So if I had to say my opinion, I would actually take the weaker winds and have reduced fire behavior. That could just be my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. So air quality wise, not looking too good over the next couple days. The main reason for that, again, is because the Creek Fire and the Castle Fire here, which are honestly producing more smoke than I've seen in probably the last week. They are producing a large amount of smoke right now, and that's what's spreading into the valley, producing some of that poor air quality. We can actually see where some of that smoke is being produced if we go to the fire perimeter and hotspot map. Zooming in to the Castle Fire here, you can see it's still extremely active on this northern edge. Main reasons for that, the fuels in this area are critically dry, and there's some steep terrain. Those two things mixed together leads to continued fire growth. And you can actually see there's some areas on the northeastern section of the fire that have started to flare up again. This area was looking relatively calm last week, and you can see that we do still have some active fire behavior in that area. It'll be interesting to see if these two fires combine over the next couple of days. Something I'll keep my eye on. Now, when we look at the numbers for the Sequoia Complex or the Castle Fire, you might have been confused because I use those interchangeably. It's basically the same name there. It's up to 158,000 acres, but we are at 65% containment. So containment-wise, that's pretty good. But that northern section has been extremely active over the last few days, and it actually looks like it's getting more active. So I'm certainly going to be keeping my eye on this one. Now, also in this area, producing a lot of that smoke, is the Creek Fire. And some good news with this one, the entire southern section looks relatively calm, not too many hot spots showing up. And by hot spots, I mean these red dots here that indicates where the active fire behavior is. But where we do see that active fire behavior is really in the same spot we've been seeing it for the last 2 to 3 weeks. This western section here, this northern section up here, and this eastern finger. This fire has been going on for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and just is refusing to quit. And unfortunately, as temperatures remain warm in this area, the air remains dry, I'm expecting we'll continue to see some of this growth that we see on this map here. Now, something interesting to point out though is this northeastern section appears to be fairly calm. And we can actually see part of the reason for that, as it's pushing into where the Lions Fire had previously burned in 2018. Now, the reason that's important is this fire reduced some of the fuels in this area. And you can actually see the perfect example of how this works as the fire perimeter on the Creek Fire stops the second it gets into this area because there's less vegetation to fuel further growth. Interesting graphic for how the California ecosystem is supposed to work. One other thing I'll point out on this map, these red lines indicate where it's still uncontained, and you can see it's considered uncontained for majority of the entire northern section of this fire. So unfortunately, we will continue to see some growth. Now, where that growth will actually occur can be illustrated looking at the Wharf S-Fire computer model. This is one of the best wildfire models in the world. It pairs the fire below with the winds above, and you can see what's been going on with this fire. There's no sections that really stand out to you as growing rapidly or intensely or rapid fire spread, but where we do get those winds, you do see some continued growth, and it's in those same sections that have been burning in the past. This northern section, eastern finger, and a little bit on this western edge. Something I like to do with this map is go back to the beginning, take a look at where the fire perimeter is, and then if we forward to see what this model is expecting to happen in the next 2 days, you can see once again it's expecting some growth in the north and this eastern finger. So the rate of spread with this one hasn't been intense. There hasn't been extreme fire behavior. It's just been very steady for the last week or two because the conditions in this area have remained warm and dry, allowing for that growth to continue. Now, when it comes to the numbers for the Creek Fire, we are up to 322,000 acres, and we are at 49% containment. The majority of that containment, again, is on that southern side where the fire behavior is a lot weaker. Now, looking at the forecast, you can see it is still going to be warm today, not the triple digits we saw last week, and then throughout the rest of the week, we're going to have a great cooling trend. And like I teased at the beginning of this video, possibly some rain come Friday and Saturday. Crossing my fingers there. Now, the temperatures are still warm. Winds, like I showed earlier, could be seeing some gusts to the 20-25 mile per hour range. So when it comes to temperatures and winds, looking a lot better than last week. It's not triple digits and it's not 40 to 50 mile per hour gusts. The one thing that is allowing a lot of this growth though is this dry air that remains dry 24 hours a day, allowing for that fire spread to continue. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the August complex here because you can see it is extremely active right now with a large smoke plume blowing up over the last hour here. Now, we can actually see where this fire is burning looking at the fire perimeter and hotspot map. Scrolling up here, you can see it's extremely active, especially in this northern section and this little section right here on the east. Now, this was a fire that was starting to kind of calm down towards the end of last week, but with those red flag conditions, we got some 40 to 50 mile per hour gusts, we had extremely warm temperatures, dry air, and that allowed this fire to flare back up again. And you can see it's even burning in some sections that weren't burning towards the end of last week. Unfortunately, some of the conditions in this area do remain warm and dry, so I expect some of this growth to continue. Now, I know I just said a lot of bad news, so let's check out the Zogg fire for some good news, where we see there are no longer any hotspots showing up on this map. That is great news there. This is a fire that was burning extremely rapidly towards last week when we had that red flag warning, so it's great to see that the hotspots appear to be completely gone when it comes to the Zogg fire. Now, we'll look at the numbers for the Zogg fire. It's at 56,000 acres, hasn't gone up much in the last 2 or 3 days, and it is already at 82% containment. That is amazing. They were able to get that much containment on this fire in that short a period of time. Now, when we look at the numbers for the August complex, this one doesn't have as great of news. We're officially over 1 million acres with the August complex. To put that into perspective, that is more than we typically see in an entire wildfire season for California. So in one fire, we have passed the seasonal average. And another thing to point out, if you were to take the perimeter of the August complex and stretch it out in a straight line, it would reach past Los Angeles. So that just puts into perspective how massive this fire is, and unfortunately, I expect some of this growth to continue. Now, as always, check the link in the description for all the recent evacuations. I would suggest that for the Zogg fire as well. I know I just said the fire appears to be out, but never take my word for it, as CAL FIRE has all the most recent information. Now, looking at the August complex, we are up to 242 structures destroyed, and there has been 1 injury. When it comes to personnel, we have about 1,730 crews, 15 helicopters, 185 engines, 39 dozers, and 44 water tenders. So there's a lot of resources on this fire, and that's because, unfortunately, there is still a lot of work to be done. Now, looking at the forecast for this area, you can see wind gusts are relatively calm right now. We could be getting up into that 20 mile per hour range later, but like I said, much better than last week. Weak winds again overnight, then back into the 20 mile per hour range tomorrow afternoon. So wind-wise, I'd say we're looking a lot better than last week. Now, when we go to the high temperature for today, that's where it is still going to be warm. We're still in the 80s for this fire. That's about what it was last week. It didn't see triple-digit temperatures around this area. And then looking at tomorrow, it's going to still be warm in this area, where we will start to see some of these cooling temps take effect, are moving into Friday and Saturday, where we might actually be getting into the 60s as that coastal influence starts to push in. It's also interesting to look at humidity, because I would say this is the main reason this fire has continued to be so active. You can see the air is extremely dry, 10% humidity. We do see a little better recovery in the overnight hours than with some of our other fires, as it's closer to the coast and gets some of that influence. But once you get back into the afternoon, you get back into those single digits, which allows that fire spread to continue. Now, just a sneak peek at later. I know it's extended forecast, so I'm not saying this is guaranteed to happen, but come Saturday afternoon, when that possible rain event is moving in, we might have 100% humidity, which would be huge when it comes to fighting this fire. So I'm going to keep my eye on it and keep giving you guys the most recent updates. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the glass fire here. And looking at the satellite imagery, it's hard to tell if this area right here is smoke or fog. So if you live in this area, be sure to let me know in the comments, because just based on this map, it's hard to tell exactly what that is. Now, when we go to the fire perimeter and hotspot map, this is also why I'm not sure whether that's smoke or fog. It's because the fire behavior appears to be relatively weak, but we do have some hotspots remaining in this northern section here. Now, overall, I would say this fire is looking great. Last week, you remember when this fire was first taken off, this entire perimeter was actively growing and at an extremely rapid rate. And right now, you can see, it doesn't appear there's that many hotspots left. Maybe a couple in the north here. Now, there's a few reasons for that. I would say the biggest one is this northern section that saw a lot of the fastest growth has significantly calmed down as it's pushed into the LNU lightning complex fire scar. So about a month ago, the LNU fire burned out a lot of this vegetation. So by the time the glass fire moved in here, there was less fuel to feed further growth. So that has significantly slowed a lot of the growth on this northern section, which was the most active area in the past. We can actually see that perfectly illustrated when we look at the fire history for this. So this is showing the fire perimeter when it first started on the 28th. You can see it actually started as two separate fires. Just going back, this is when there was some 50-mile-per-hour winds. It took a spot fire from one of these fires to create the other one, and then those rapid winds led to some fire growth, rapid fire growth, both this day and the next day, where you see this fire just doubling and tripling in size over about a 24-hour period. Now, once that red flag warning ended and the triple-digit temperature started to calm down, the major areas we saw that continued growth was in the north here, and then on the 30th, we did see this area in the south burning as well. Now, as we go to the 1st, you can see the majority of that growth is just into the northern section, and you'll notice that it hasn't pushed into that LNU fire scar yet, as we still see that strong growth on this northern section here. Pushing into the 2nd, though, we start to see the influence of that reduced fuels due to the LNU fire, as we get less growth on this northeastern section. Looking at the 3rd, that trend continues along with the 4th and the 5th. You can see for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, really the only place we see growth for this entire fire is on this northern section that is outside of the LNU scar. Where the LNU scar is, the growth appears to stop. Amazing just example of how this fire behaves. Now, when it comes to this fire, I would say there is some pretty good news with this one. Overall, you can see that the fire behavior has significantly calmed down. We're no longer seeing it double and triple in size over a 24-hour period. And for the most part, it stayed out of our highly populated areas that were of extreme priority. You can see in Calistoga here, the fire came down right close to this populated area, but then appeared to stop at the base of this mountain. Now, the same is true for St. Helena. This is one of the key areas I was watching with this fire. And you can see, came down to the base of these hills and then appeared to stop as it got into the highly populated area. The same is true for the Santa Rosa side. This was an area of the fire I was watching extremely closely. And after the first 2 or 3 days of this fire, the behavior on this entire southern edge really just calmed down, which was great to see. So there's a few things that led to the calming down of this fire. One, that northern section that was the most active started moving into the burn scar, which means less fuel. The other factor that reduced the fire growth, and quite possibly the more important factor, was something that I actually got to see for myself. On Friday evening, I went up to the glass fire with the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory to get some data on the plume dynamics associated with the glass fire with our mobile lidar and radar truck. Now, looking at this video, you can see where this smoke plume is coming up right over this ridge line. We did see some torching and active fire behavior. This is showing our radar truck here as it scans the plume. But the number one thing that I noticed being on this fire was that it was much cooler than the forecast was saying, and it was much windier. You can actually see the effect of these winds. If I replay this video, this tree isn't moving at all. The winds were about 0 to 3 miles per hour. And to put that in perspective, this is when we had that red flag warning. This is when we're supposed to have triple-digit temperatures and 50-mile-per-hour winds. And the conditions were relatively cool with 0 winds whatsoever. The reason for that is this protective smoke layer. Now, that doesn't allow the sunlight in, which reduces the temperatures. With a reduced temperature gradient, you get less wind. So I know we've talked about that in a lot of our videos in the past, but it was pretty amazing getting to see that actually in action. So getting back to our numbers here, let's actually see what the glass fire has done. It's up to 66,000 acres. Like I said, it has significantly reduced in fire spread over the last few days as our temperatures and winds have gone down significantly. Containment is already up to 50%, so that's great to see there. When it comes to evacuations, again, don't take my word for it. Check the link in the description. And when it comes to damages and losses, this is where there is some bad news. With this fire, we have had 1,400 structures destroyed. So that is a very significant number. So if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this wildfire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. When it comes to personnel, we almost have 3,000 personnel still on this fire, 27 crews, 20 helicopters, 409 engines, 48 dozers, and 48 water tenders. So as I showed, there's only a few hotspots left with this one, and there's a lot of resources, so hopefully they'll be able to attack those last remaining burning regions to just put this fire to bed. Looking at the forecast, this is going to be in our favor as well. You can see we're about 10 to 15 degrees cooler than last week, and that cooling trend is actually going to increase as we move throughout this week, getting into 80 on Wednesday, 70s on Thursday, and then hopefully 60s and rain as we move into the weekend. Now, one thing to note, there is still some dry air in this region, but it appears to be getting a lot more humid as we move into Wednesday and Wednesday night. So overall, I'm feeling pretty good about the glass fire. The fire behavior has been significantly reduced both by that smoke layer and the LNU scar, and we have a lot of resources on it, so I think the worst is behind us. Cross my fingers though, hopefully I don't jinx it like I did with the Bobcat Fire last week. Now the next fire I want to talk about is the North Complex, because this was actually another fire that I jinxed last week, and we saw some hurricane force wind gusts 70 miles per hour that actually led to some rapid fire growth towards last Wednesday through Friday. I'm happy to say though that the majority of that active fire behavior is gone. We have maybe 1 or 2 remaining hotspots in the very northern section here, but for the most part, this fire is looking great. Now, if we actually go and look at the numbers for this one, we're up to 318,000 acres. Haven't seen all that much growth in the last 2 days, and perimeter contained is up to 86%. You can actually see where that is on this map. The entire black line shows where it's contained. Basically the entire fire except for this northwestern section. And given the reduced fire behavior, I expect to see some good containment in this area throughout the week, and especially this weekend as the forecast gets into the 70s and 60s and we have that chance of rain. Now with that being said, today is still going to be warm. We're in the 90s and we do still have humidity in the low teens. So I'm certainly going to be watching this one. I certainly hope I didn't just jinx it by saying it's basically done, but when it comes to the extended forecast, I would say things are looking great for the North Complex, and I'm thinking the worst is behind us with this one as well. Now, the last fire I want to talk about is the Bobcat Fire, because this is one that started to flare up last weekend when we had the triple-digit temperatures, humidities in the single digits, and wind gusts in the 30 and 40 mile per hour range. And just given the satellite imagery here, it's really hard to tell if we still see some smoke with this one. When it comes to the acreage burned, maybe went up 100 or 200 acres yesterday. Certainly not as bad as we saw in the past. And if we actually go to the fire perimeter and hotspot map, you can see what's actually going on with this one. Once again, it appears to be out or just a couple hotspots remaining. This is the area that flared up towards last weekend with those red flag conditions, but for the most part, the Bobcat Fire is looking out. And I would say we don't have to worry as much about another flare-up happening, as the forecast for the rest of this week is looking good. Temperature-wise especially, we could be getting into the 60s, and while humidity is still low and it remains low in the nighttime hours, this is surprisingly up from what it was last week. Last week, this entire graph was below 15% for 48 hours straight. So we're actually going to be getting up into the 30, maybe 40% range. And while we do see some wind gusts, not as bad as last week. So I would say the Bobcat Fire is looking done, and hopefully this is the last time I even have to mention it. So looking at the overall 2020 California wildfire season, it's been a bad one. We've had over 4 million acres burned now. That's twice the previous record. And as you can see, the August complex has burned over 1 million acres. That is also double the previous record. And unfortunately, with the August and Creek Fire, I do expect to still see some growth over the next 2 to 3 days as temperatures remain warm and dry. But as we look at the extended forecast, I would say things are looking great, especially if we get that rain event. Now, tomorrow I still won't be diving into that rain event as it's still in the extended forecast, but if you want to stay updated with that one, I'm most likely going to dive into it Thursday and Friday as we get closer to the actual event and the forecast models get more confident. As always, if you're a member of CAL FIRE or the U.S. Forest Service, thank you for all the amazing work you do, as well as San Jose State and Dr. Craig Clements for basically teaching me everything I know about wildfire. And if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by these wildfires, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and thanks for watching.